early 2000s, I guess, that our system is open. It supports open communication. You can connect it to anything. Bring an Ethernet switch and plug into our system, and we'll support it. So this is what happened in the ICS revolution environment. Then we said, oh, how about we connect it to the internet? Maybe I can have a vendor who's connecting remotely can connect to my system and help me manage my control system, and that will prevent me from having to have a qualified person inside the plant environment. So there was a wild run towards making everything open on the control system side. And then we thought about, hey, how about we connect all the individual plants into a central environment? Oh, we have MPLS, we have PSTN, we have fibers. Let's connect all the plants into my headquarters and have a central control room. While doing all of that, what was never really thought of is you're connecting these legacy devices that were not even designed for control systems. You're connecting them to Ethernet and internet. Is that a good idea? I think that this was an afterthought, that while most OT components, most ICS components, the components themselves were never designed with cybersecurity in mind. And even when I used to implement control systems project, my, end goal used to be, how can I make it work? Cybersecurity, what is that? That is for IT folks. That is for the banks and the telecom companies. I don't care about cybersecurity. So all these open systems, increased network connectivity, digital transformation, IoT, heavy use of commercial off-the-shelf, all those proprietary printers and workstations, they went away, and we started implementing the Dell and the HP and the IBM and Lenovo and Cisco. Wow, man, I can buy a switch from the local market and then install it on my control system. That is just awesome. Everything started going towards Ethernet. And yet nobody thought about all the cybersecurity loopholes that these systems had. And because of lack of cybersecurity awareness among the users and the administrators and even the businesses, it was just in my opinion, a disaster waiting to happen. So what this did was, the consequences were already high. Now we have increased the vulnerability of our control systems through all these open connections and all these, Ethernet-based or internet-based connectivity. Now with all
Welcome to Global Information Security Society for Professionals of Pakistan.
So, welcome everybody to today's session on OT Cybersecurity. I will just introduce again because we were not recording before. So we are doing this session after a long time, but it was highly required and highly needed, because OT cybersecurity is in these days. Many people many companies are using these services and all that. And I was asking Mr. Mubarik for a long time to have similar kind of session where we can explain about OT cybersecurity, as well as guide our youth about our members about the career path of OT cybersecurity. So inshallah, we'll cover both in this section. The session will be in English, just to keep it as a global, because we have some members in the US, Canada, and other places which don't understand Urdu very clearly. So we'll keep it in English, but a part of it we'll do in Urdu at the end. So stay tuned, stay with us. And there's a survey form sent by Mr. Mubarak, which is he's just displaying on the screen. If you haven't filled that, the link is in the chat. You can just click there and fill that out. So it will give him an idea about the kind of the audience available for the session. So Mr. Mubarak, kindly introduce yourself and you can start the session. Thank you, sir.
Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shahzad, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today's session on OT cybersecurity for IT professionals. I'm really excited about the session itself, as well as the awesome response that we have received for the pre-survey. I see that we have a lot of diverse background audience here, as well as very, I would say, quite, I guess, even from experience perspective, almost a quarter of the audience are over 10 years of experience, and maybe half of them over 5 years experience. So that's pretty good. And I'm humbled that such experienced professionals are also joining the session to listen to me. I also see that most people, as expected, don't have a very strong background of industrial control systems, which is again expected because this is an introduction to OT security for IT professionals. So that's perfectly okay. And that gives me the opportunity to sort of tailor the discussion more for the IT folks and not go too deep into the technicalities of the industrial control systems. So hopefully you all can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see.
All right. So the agenda will have a quick introduction. We'll define what OT is and what OT cybersecurity is and why do we need that. We'll have a little bit discussion about industrial control systems, evolution and revolution. And then, of course, the main part of the discussion about OT versus IT cybersecurity. What are the challenges and what are the opportunities? I guess, guidance about the interaction. I like our sessions to be interactive because that keeps the interest level going from both sides, even from my side, and also to help gauge the understanding that the audience are developing. But in the interest of, because a lot of material to cover and we have about an hour, maybe less than that, I'll try and finish it in 45 minutes or so. We'll keep the question and answers for the end. You're welcome to post questions on chat. Of course, I'd appreciate if you can keep your mics on mute. It'll help with the, I guess, smooth functioning of the session. Quick introduction about myself. My name is Mubarik Mustafa. I have about over 25, maybe around 27 years of experience in industrial automation engineering and OT cybersecurity. And I say that because for the first about 18 years of my career, I have done designing and implementation of industrial control systems. And that gives me a little bit of an edge in terms of the knowledge and experience required for OT cybersecurity. And for the past about 10 years or so, 8-9 years, I'm working in the OT cybersecurity domain. And I have some credentials to go along with my experience. So very quick introduction. It's not a marketing or sales, but the company I work for a company called ACET Solutions, which is an industrial OT cybersecurity consultancy services provider. Head office is in the US and lots of presence in the Middle East and other parts of the world. So let's briefly talk about what is OT. The term OT is a fancy word. By definition, it is called operational technology. But to me, that was just a fancy innovation by engineers like us who said, well, IT, information technology, is a fancy word. We should come up with a fancy word. So we thought about OT. But really, it is another name for any hardware and software that is used to monitor and control industrial facilities. You may have heard the term ICS, industrial control systems, industrial automation, SCADA systems. In fact, there's a very long list of the type of, I guess, systems that fall under the OT domain. DCS, ESD, SCADA, maybe you've heard the term PLCs and RTUs. fire and gas system, IIoT, another fancy word. IoT was Internet of Things. So we thought we'll make industrial Internet of Things. So all these different systems, they all fall under OT. And basically, by definition, what I say is that any electronic and computer system that is utilized by industrial facilities to operate safely. So the key word is to operate safely. So why do we need OT cybersecurity? What is all the fuss about? So if I have to describe the reason for OT cybersecurity, there is just one word that comes to mind, and that is I think no cybersecurity session can go without mentioning the word Stuxnet or Stuxnet, depending upon how you like to pronounce it. Obviously, I just put it up there because this is where it all started, all the hoopla about protecting industrial control systems. And I'm sure most of you, a lot of you who are already in information security domain, you probably know about it and what happened and all and the background behind it. So today's session is not about Stuxnet, but it just tells us that about 10, 12 years ago, this all hoopla started. Going forward, why do we need to talk about OT security beyond the word Stuxnet? In every time we talk about security, or even in any business, one of the key, I guess, headache for the management, the top management, is to manage their risk. And the definition of risk in terms of cybersecurity, again, this is not a lecture on cybersecurity, you guys probably already know about it, but risk equation is vulnerability times threat times consequences. So the reason I'm putting it up here that we will see all these three, I guess, components of this equation, how are these relevant in the OT security environment. Let's talk about the consequences part first, because that is very easy to understand. That in an industrial environment, when we talk about all these industrial control systems, obviously they're monitoring or controlling or interfacing with an industrial facility. And that's where the difference in consequence comes up. If you talk about the IT environment, obviously, you know, if there's an attack on the bank, yes, you will lose $10 million and all, or if there's a ransomware attack on a corporate environment, you will lose 20 million, you have to pay the ransomware. But an attack on the industrial control system can result in actual physical things happening, like loss of production, impact on product quality, even penalties. In the US, you know, you can even get penalized if you get an attack. That doesn't make any sense if I state it like this, but there are cases where if you're for critical infrastructure, if you don't have the appropriate cybersecurity implemented and you get attacked, you will get penalties. Lawsuits, loss of market value, physical damage, but more importantly, this is something that can happen. Environmental damage, injury, and loss of life. You know, you could even have, you know, some kind of an explosion, or if it's a critical infrastructure, like we'll see a few examples, it can impact general public as well in a significant way. So the consequences of an attack, a cyber attack on OT systems is much, much more severe in nature. It's not just financial, it is more physical. So from the risk equation perspective, the consequence part is already high. It doesn't matter whether you have vulnerabilities or threat or not. I'll throw a few examples and I'll quickly glide through these. I'm not gonna, this was some animation done for, you know, another session, but, you know, there was an attack in Ukraine. I'm sure you've heard about it, about 6-7 years ago, where the whole, you know, city of Ivano-Frankivsk, I can't even pronounce that, the electricity supply to the city was shut down and people were without power for, you know, many hours and maybe in some cases many days. Similarly, in Florida, in a city of Oldsmar, there is a water treatment plant which was attacked, and it resulted in almost, not really, but it was, I guess, caught and stopped at the right time. But it could have impacted the quality of water supply to the city of Oldsmar. It's just an animation to show how it happens is that there is a control system which is adding some chemical to the water, chlorine or something, to keep it clean. And there was an attack and there was an effort to increase the quantity of the chemical in the water. And that would have, if it was successful and the contaminated water was supplied to the city, it would have, God knows what would have happened to the population there. And I'm sure you've heard about the attack on Colonial Pipeline that happened in May of 2021, last year, exactly 1 year ago, where the pipeline was shut down for about, I think, a few days, 3-4 days. It was a ransomware attack. Now, when we talk about attack, information security folks, they already know about all these things. Okay, the ransomware or the virus and all that. But what we are showing over here is the consequence part. And I have several examples. I'll just quickly go through these. That all of these attacks all over the world, this happened in Australia, and then there is another one in a water utility company in the US. All these attacks resulted in some physical impact to either an industry or to people. So that brings up the question, how can a hacker or an attacker turn off electricity or add more chemical to the water or shut down an oil pipeline? How does that even happen? Industrial control systems have evolved. We'll talk about what the industrial control systems are and how they evolved and what is the so-called revolution that has been happening for the past, I guess, almost a decade or so. So what is industrial control system? This is going to be about 5 minutes or so, just to give you a brief idea about what when we say ICS environment, what it is. So a long time back in my early days, and yes, I'm old, I've already told you, I have 27 years experience, so I'm definitely quite old, but I have literally seen this thing happening, that there's a guy sitting next to a valve looking at some value of a temperature or something. And then based on the value, temperature is too high, let me close the valve so the fire becomes a little bit less, and it will bring the temperature down, and the other way. Obviously, that's not a very efficient or productive way to operate a facility. So the control systems evolved into some kind of an automatic operation where there were some so-called controllers invented, which would measure the same temperature, for example, and based on the value of the temperature and the setting or the set point, desired set point, just like we do in an AC at home, that I want the temperature to be 25 or 24 or 23, the controller would control the valve opening and closing, and it would result in the appropriate temperature level to be achieved. Similarly, when we talk about substations which are supplying power to a city, even now I know a lot of substations in a lot of countries, it is manually operated. So when you have to have load shedding in some part of the world, there's physically a guy sitting there who would just get up and flip a breaker to disconnect or reconnect the power supply to certain parts of the city or whatever the region they're supplying. And then the so-called electronic breakers came into picture, where the breakers would, the so-called computer or controller would open or close the breaker based on whatever the requirement is of the operation. This is sort of what I'm calling the evolution of industrial control system. They evolved over time. The controllers or computers became more and more sophisticated, but still they were quite, I'm calling them legacy or proprietary. So I'll skip this part again in the interest of time and talk about when I say legacy control systems. And in a typical plant environment, you would have hundreds, maybe thousands of these small controllers controlling different parts of the facility. And that's basically how the industrial evolution, as the ICS evolution supported the industrial revolution as well. However, these control systems were still, I'm calling them legacy, because they had proprietary hardware and software, proprietary operating systems as well. Yeah, some of the old ones were Unix based, but even on top of Unix, the Honeywells and the Yokogawas of the world, which made the DCSs, the control systems. Even the printer was their own. You couldn't buy a printer from outside and connect it to their system. Their networks were proprietary. There was limited external communication. These systems were so closed that unless it is certified by that particular company who made the system, nobody could even interface with them. So these systems were difficult to compromise, and hence cybersecurity was not a concern at all. And what that means that in the past, the vulnerability of control systems was quite low. And that is the reason we never heard about cybersecurity for control systems for maybe up until a decade ago or so. And then what happened? The industrial revolution happened, fourth industrial revolution, Industry 4.0. We've all heard about this fancy word, Industry 4.0. And what that is I'm sure all of you are from IT, you love these pictures, I'm sure. The wires, we techies, we love the Ethernet cable. Oh, give me a cable, where do I plug it in? Oh, wow, I have these modern servers and cabinets and all that. And then the control system vendor said, well, good idea. How about we utilize these these powerful computers and put our slow working systems on these powerful computers, so even the industrial control systems would become more powerful. And that's where the revolution happened, even in the ICS environment, industrial control systems environment, that very, I guess, open systems started getting rolled out. You would have networks and wireless and interconnection with the plant networks, with the IT networks. There was literally a run, what do you call, not even a run, a dash towards how can I make my control system, which was so closed, so legacy, nobody could even talk to it. Let me make it open. The word open was so misused, so used in, I guess, early 2000s, I guess, that our system is open. It supports open communication. You can connect it to anything. Bring an Ethernet switch and plug into our system and we'll support it. So this is what happened in the ICS revolution environment. Then we said, oh, how about we connect it to the internet? Maybe I can have a vendor who's connecting remotely can connect to my system and help me manage my control system, and that will prevent me from having to have a qualified person inside the plant environment. So there was a wild run towards making everything open on the control system side. And then we thought about, hey, how about we connect all the individual plants into a central environment? Oh, we have MPLS, we have PSTN, we have fibers. Let's connect all the plants into my headquarters and have a central control room. While doing all of that, what was never really thought of is you're connecting these legacy devices that were not even designed for control systems. You're connecting them to Ethernet and internet. Is that a good idea? I think that this was an afterthought, that while most OT components, most ICS components, the components themselves were never designed with cybersecurity in mind. And even when I used to implement control systems project, my, I guess, end goal used to be, how can I make it work? Cybersecurity, what is that? That is for IT folks. That is for the banks and the telecom companies. I don't care about cybersecurity. So all these open systems, increased network connectivity, digital transformation, IoT, heavy use of commercial off-the-shelf, all those proprietary printers and workstations, they went away, and we started implementing the Dell and the HP and the IBM and Lenovo and Cisco. Wow, man, I can buy a switch from the local market and then install it on my control system. That is just awesome. Everything started going towards Ethernet. And yet nobody thought about all the cybersecurity loopholes that these systems had. And because of lack of cybersecurity awareness among the users and the administrators and even the businesses, it was just in my opinion, a disaster waiting to happen. So what this did was the consequences were already high. Now we have increased the vulnerability of our control systems through all these open connections and all these, Ethernet-based or internet-based connectivity. Now, with all that, even this happened in early 2000s, but why wasn't cybersecurity a concern up until maybe a decade ago? Well, because again, Stuxnet, because the threats in the past, the hackers would typically focus on attacking the banks or financial institutions, or maybe steal your personal information, your credit cards, your passwords and all. The attackers didn't really seem to be concerned about the OT systems. But then it changed. The threat that was low before, it changed. That the OT systems programming and access, it became common knowledge. You can literally spend $30 and learn about PLCs on the internet. I'm saying $30, but that's too much. You can learn about these things for free. And hackers and attackers, they started using more sophisticated tools. Organized crime, think about Colonial Pipeline, which is supplying 1/4 of the oil in the US South. If it was shut down for 4 days, that's a very lucrative. Ransomware, I think they paid a few $1 million to get out of it. So organized crime focused on industrial facilities. Even hacktivists, for publicity, for political agenda, for propaganda, they started attacking, because when there's an attack on even a small water treatment facility that I talked about in Florida, it's a very small plant, the size of maybe a small building or a small house or big house. That's how these plants are. But the propaganda, wow, man, a water treatment plant was attacked. So it gave them the publicity that they were looking for. Insider threats, non-malicious and as well as malicious revenge. There were certain attacks, and one example that I had on a slide before escaped it, where a person inside the company, he did it for a few months. He deliberately manipulated the control system to cause damage inside the facility. And of course, we know about all the terrorism and the state level threats. We're talking about the 5th generation war and all that. So all these threats have done, what these have done is that the threat level is also very high now, which means this is where we are today when it comes to the OT cybersecurity. So what is the solution? What do we do now that we have sort of established that OT cybersecurity is a big risk, it's a big concern? What should we do? I think we should avoid automation. We should get rid of industrial control systems. Well, that's not a solution, because it's a never going back type of thing. The benefits we are getting from industrial automation, both in terms of efficiency, quality, productivity, it is just humongous. There is no going back. In fact, it's all the way forward. More and more facilities, even in third world countries, facilities, plants that typically used to say, oh, we don't need automation, they're implementing DCSs and industrial control systems. The other option is to disconnect the industrial control systems from all networks. Well, that's not going to happen either, because there is a huge benefit, the whole digital transformation, and that's a different topic. Maybe we can have a session on it some other time. But the whole idea is that you connect these control systems to, business systems, and get the data, do the analysis, manipulate it, so business can make intelligent decisions to help them reduce their costs or increase the production, increase profitability. So there's no going back. And in fact, in my opinion, disconnected ICS is a myth. Even if you disconnect it physically, like turn off the firewall, I've seen some facilities where they say, oh, we have disconnected the Ethernet cable from the firewall, so we are safe. And we did an assessment, and within half a day, we showed them that they had some intrusion points on from other paths. So disconnected ICS is a myth, in my opinion. So we should just ask the IT security to take over OT security, because IT security has been doing this for decades now. So they should just implement OT security as well. Well, Yes and no. We shouldn't just push away IT security, but we cannot just blindly implement or do what we've been doing on the IT side of cybersecurity on the OT side. And why? So that brings us to the topic about what is the difference and similarities between OT and IT security. When I see this picture, and I showed this before as well, you know, it has the same computer. This looks like a server, and there's a network, there's a switch. This looks like a data center. Oh, I like the firewall over here, and workstations, computers. It's all IT equipment. What's all the hoopla about? We can just use the IT policies, procedures, and implement it on OT side. Well, the similarities end at this superficial level. Yes, it is all IT type equipment, but that's about it. The application of it, the use of it, and how they're implemented, it's quite different in the OT side. I'm sure you've all, anybody who has ever tried to learn about OT security, the very first thing they probably saw was this. It's a very, I guess, overused image, but it's a fact that the main difference is that on the IT side, the confidentiality is the biggest, I guess, concern. And then integrity and availability. Yeah, I shut down my switch every 2 weeks to upgrade the firmware or whatever. On the ICS side, and we'll go into the detail of it, it's the CIA triad is reversed. So the availability is on the top, and then integrity, and then confidentiality. But if we dig a little bit more deeper into the differences in OT versus IT, in IT, there is scheduled operation. Yes, there are mission critical servers. I'm not trying to say that, in IT, you can, at 4 p.m., you shut down your servers and go home, but still, it is more transactional. It's more, even if you talk about banking operation, for example, it's transactional operation. It's not a continuous operation that we see in an ICS environment. The industrial control systems, they keep operating literally for many years until you reboot them. A refinery, they have a typical, they call it a turnaround, and turnaround is when they shut down the refinery for maintenance. They do it once every 5 years. So for 5 years, the control system needs to function. You cannot just reboot it because you have to install a patch. In IT, occasional failures are tolerated. Sorry, I get a message from my bank every month that, from midnight to 2 a.m., we have scheduled operation. We will, the services, ATM will be not available, or the online banking will not be available. That's not going to happen in a control system environment. You're not going to get a scheduled time for months or maybe years. So there's no outage that is acceptable, especially unplanned outage. Rebooting is tolerated in IT. In OT environment, it is extremely difficult. Not, in most cases, extremely difficult to allow rebooting. It has to be a very well planned and very well, I guess, executed operation if you do that. Beta testing in field is acceptable. You talk about the production environment and the development environment and all that. In ICS environment, we do so-called factory acceptance test and site acceptance test, and then we make it work for the next 5 years. If you may have to make a change, it requires sometimes formal certification. Just making a change to a program that, okay, the pump has to start at 10 p.m. instead of 8 p.m., it may require a lot of approval and a lot of, I guess, work permits and all those things. While in the IT environment, minor changes are, especially if they're maintenance related, they're possible without any or much paperwork. So this is the availability part of the differences. Then there are performance requirements. On the IT side, your response must be reliable. So when I want to make a transaction in my bank and an ATM transaction, some ATMs are fast, some are slow. Well, by slow, I mean they take maybe 1 minute as opposed to another ATM takes 30 minutes to dispense cash. It's not a big deal. It's annoying, but still, I can wait a couple of minutes. In the ICS environment, we were talking about that man sitting there controlling the temperature. The response is time critical. Most control systems, they operate at maybe milliseconds. 100 milliseconds is too much for them. And then on top of that, they have to be predictable. If something happens at 76 millisecond, it's going to happen at 76 millisecond. It's not like, okay, one time it's 76, one time it's 50, and then 100, and then 76. No, it has to happen every 76 milliseconds. In the IT environment, the throughput is typically very high. In IT and OT environment, no, it's modest throughput is typically sufficient. In IT, high delay and jitter is tolerated. And over here, like I said, that if it's 76 millisecond, it has to be 76 milliseconds. It's not going to be acceptable that sometimes it's up and down. In IT, there is less critical emergency interaction, which means that if, of course, there is an operational impact. If, let's say, your critical server goes down, which was processing, again, payments in a bank, I'm not saying it's not critical, but it's not an emergency situation. It's not like people are going to die if, the server doesn't come back up in about, 10 minutes. In the IT, in the ICS environment, response to emergencies is very critical. It's all, I give the analogy of like a fire department, firefighters. They have to respond in a certain way. They cannot be, okay, I have to go to work, so I'll stop and get some coffee and then I'll get to work. The response to emergency is extremely critical. In the IT, there is IT protocols, and obviously in the ICS environment, there are industrial protocols. We'll talk a little bit about it later, how that impacts us. So these were some of the performance requirements or differences in the performance requirements. Operating environment. In the IT, this is a very common thing that is usually misunderstood. Obviously, in the Office environment, we have Office applications. I'm not saying Microsoft Office, but the ERP and Office type applications. In the ICS environment, we have special control system software and applications which operate in a certain way from control systems perspective. In IT, you would always have standard operating system. I would say majority, I don't want to say a percentage, you guys know better, whether it's 90% or 99, it's going to be either Windows or Linux. Fine, you will have a little bit variation here and there. In the ICS environment, especially at the controller level, you have embedded operating systems which are made by that particular vendor. So if there are 20 different companies supplying industrial control system controllers, you would have 20 different operating systems. Some may be based on Linux, but they'll be very specialized operating system strictly for that particular device. Even from one company, from device to device, the operating system would be different. In IT environment, upgrades are straightforward. Microsoft, even now my laptop has that icon, the red icon on the side, very annoying one, where it says, click on it and your system will be updated. And that's it. Yes, it's reboot, it's annoying. But in the ICS environment, the upgrades are very challenging and may impact the hardware, the logic, the graphics. Even a Microsoft patch, if I have to install on a computer running control system application, I cannot just install Microsoft patch because it's a Microsoft patch. No, I have to make sure that it's not going to break that particular application. And in a lot of cases, it does break it. And then we have bigger problems. Another big difference in the IT environment, technology is refreshed literally, in big companies, 3 to 5 years, you'll get a new laptop or new computer, new servers. In OT, the typical life of equipment is 15 to 20 years, and it's even more. Literally right now, I can tell you that there are some systems, a lot of systems running Windows XP. I've even seen Windows 2000, even today. And it's not an anomaly that, okay, 1 out of a million. It's fairly, I would say, common. And when you talk about even computers, so you will still see the Pentium computers and Pentium 3s and 4s and all. So the equipment the life cycle is fairly long in ICS environment. In IT, the horsepower on your computing environment is usually abundant, or you have the option to add it. In the ICS environment, for example, especially in the controllers, On a Dell computer used in ICS, yes, I can add another hard disk. I can add, RAM can be 32 gig. I can upgrade to 64. But in the controller side, we're still talking about MBs of RAM. Okay, it has 100 megabytes of RAM. So in IT environment, you cannot even imagine, even your iPhone or Android phone has 128 to 56 gigs. But in ICS environment, you would find devices that are very low in terms of the processing power, in terms of memory, in terms of all the features that they have in there regarding communication and all. Even the risk management goals are different in the OT side. As we said earlier, in the IT, data confidentiality is the most important, and then data integrity is paramount. Availability is, I'm not saying it's also okay, but it is tolerated, let's put it that way. In the ICS environment, HSE, which means health, safety, and environment, that there's an oil spill because an attack happened on a control system, that may not be acceptable. Or worst case, we have heard the Chernobyls and these kind of incidents. If it's a nuclear facility which has dangerous stuff out there, if there's a leak of any radiation, that's going to have huge impact on not just that facility, but the cities and even the countries. So availability of the ICS has to run for many years, and integrity, it has to run the way it was supposed to. It cannot go left and right a little bit. Confidentiality, it's okay. On the IT side, the risk impact is, we talked about it, loss of data, delay of business operation. On the ICS side, loss of life, equipment production can happen. In the IT side, you can recover by reboot. In the ICS side, if a system fails, the plant restart can take hours, sometimes even days. There's one facility I worked in, and it used to take them 3 days to start up the plant. So you cannot reboot just because, fine, it's going to be a 10 minutes outage for reboot. No, it's going to take 3 days, and 1 day loss will be $10 million. So that's not going to be acceptable. We talked about the confidentiality, and I think just a copy paste mistake. So with these highlights of the differences in the environments, I want to talk about the opportunity here. And it's going to kind of summarize what we just mentioned, that the risk is huge in the OT environment, in the industrial environment. The risk is huge because there are millions and millions of industrial control systems installed, and most of them are not secure. We mentioned that there is no security in the components, as well as in the design, as well as in the implementation. I've seen firewall. What is a firewall? Literally, I get asked this question. Not anymore, but up until a few years ago, firewall used to be, wow, man, your plant has a firewall. That's a big deal. It's still a relatively new field, relatively new, meaning it's still been around for about a decade or so. But compared with IT security, OT security is still relatively new, which means there is limited resources available in the world to implement security. So if you combine this two, that you have so much demand for industrial control system security and there are limited resources available in the world, then of course that, to me, it's a risk and a challenge, but also a huge opportunity for professionals like us to get into the OT security domain. How do we do that? If we want to get into OT security, what do we do? Obviously, if you have information security background, then you do have a little bit of an edge, but you will need if you really want to do justice, and I say that with a certain level of, I guess, I want to be cautious about what I say, that to do justice to industrial control system, to really secure these systems, not just doing something superficial. If there's a requirement to implement a firewall, I'm sure half of you would do that in your sleep. That's not a problem. But if you really want to do that justice to control system security, you need to learn about all the architectures and components and functionality and applications of industrial control systems. You need to understand how these different, the controllers, the HMIs, the operator workstations, historians, what are these things? What's a historian? What does it even do? What is an operator workstation? What if the operator workstation goes down for an hour? What happens? How about HMI? What is an HMI? What does it even stand for? What are the different communication gateways and how do they impact the operation of the facility? You will need to know the functional differences between the DCS and the PLC and ESD and SCADA, because the cybersecurity requirements are different for each. What is a vibration monitoring system? What impact it'll have if that particular system goes down for an hour? And then you need vendor-specific knowledge as well, because in control systems environment, every vendor has their own architecture. Honeywell architecture is different from Yokogawa architecture. Their components are different. Their connectivity is different. Their communication protocols are different. So depending upon what is installed at a client's facility, you will need to know what those technologies are and the details of each. And very important, industrial communication protocols, because when you're securing the networks, you need to know what protocols are on the network and how the data is flowing from one component to the other, and what to allow in terms of communication, what not to allow, what's going to happen if the Modbus communication goes down and all. So very obviously it's a tall order, but still, the more you learn about industrial control systems, the better you will be equipped to design and implement OT cybersecurity. I show this this slide again because it shows the kind of different, what is an RTU, what is an IED. If you're implementing, let's say, cybersecurity on a substation, they will have IEDs. What is an IED? What does it do? How does it interface with an RTU? What is an MTU? What are the Modbus, DNP3, Profibus? How they connect all together? All of that you'll have to, even something as simple as remote access. In an IT environment, remote access, okay, yeah, we have VPN connectivity and anybody can connect from VPN. Just implementing something as basic as remote access in an OT environment, it's a pain, especially if you want to comply with the different standards that are out there. So the more you learn about the industrial control systems themselves, the better you will be equipped to succeed in this domain. You will also need to learn about industrial plants and processes. Like I gave the example of a substation. What does a substation even do? How do transformers operate? Not at that level where you need to design them, but the client sometimes asks us to identify critical assets. Which control systems components are critical? They have 100 PLCs. I want to know which PLCs are more critical than the others. Unless I know what those PLCs are doing, one PLC is controlling a water treatment facility, another is controlling, let's say, the water distribution, and there are 5 water treatment plant and 10 distribution points. So which one is more critical? Unless you know the processes, you will not be able to judge that. You will need to learn the operations and safety constraints. In plant environment, safety is paramount. Any kind of safety incident, whether it impacts people or equipment, is not tolerated. You will need to understand the data integration requirements. How do these control systems integrate with the IT? How do they integrate with the business systems? What type of data is required? What type of communication is required? Obviously, this is something that most of you may already know. You will need to know the Ciscos and the Palo Altos and Fortinets and Junipers and all that in the Windows operating system and Linux. And of course, you need the knowledge of information security, on what information security is, what is GRC, what is security operations and all. And last but not the least, knowledge of ICS specific cybersecurity standards. Extremely important because it is a relatively new field, and that's why I want to focus on this slide a little bit more. Because OT cybersecurity is a relatively new field, the domain is not even mature yet. Even the standards, the so-called, the most famous standard 62443, it's been out there for almost like 6 to 8 years. Different. It's a series of standards, by the way. It's not one standard, just like ISO 27000. It is 62443 is also a series of standard, but even they're realizing that the first version is not very usable, and they're revising the whole thing from scratch. So even though the domain is not mature, you'll still need to learn about, let's say, the 62443 and the NERC and the NIST 882, which is ICS specific, or the American Petroleum Institute 1164. If you are going to implement any kind of security in a pipeline environment, you need to know that. If you're going to implement anything in the substation or power systems, you will need to know the NERC. Then you have the country-specific standards, whether it is for Oman, or every country have their own ICS standard. Dubai has their own ICS standard. UAE Department of Energy has their own IA standard, which with a very significant portion of ICS. In Saudi, NCA, we know anybody who is in Saudi, they know NCA. They have recently, in addition to their ECC, they have recently released the control systems cybersecurity standard as well. I think it was 3 months ago. So you will need to learn about these standards, because our clients, they expect you to know these so that you can comply with the requirements of these standards. So this is something that you will be, I strongly urge you to do that. That's about it. I try to keep it very high level, very short, in the interest of, I guess, the audience. Obviously, we can go into more detail on each of these slides, and maybe if needed, we can have a separate session on it. But I'm open to questions if you have any. And Shahzad, you can help facilitate the question answers.
Guys, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay, I see. Okay, start with the first one. Yes, Sonia.
Okay. Hey, thank you for the session. So really loved it. So I have a question regarding when we were discussing OT security, and there's been a lot of malware attacks even in recent years. So how much do you think that does SCADA penetration testing can help improve OT security?
Good question, because there's from IT side, this VAPT question comes a lot. Even our clients say, oh, we want pen testing done. And I ask them question, have you even done any kind of implementation? Have you done any kind of design? And they say, no, we just want the pen testing. And I said, I can tell you without pen testing that you are vulnerable. To me, because from IT perspective, IT security is very mature. Basic cybersecurity is already implemented, so pen testing makes sense. In the OT environment, until you have done basic assessment and done basic design and implement, I'm talking about no firewall, no antivirus, no patches, nothing, literally Windows XP connected to the internet. Open invitation, like a child hacker can hack into those systems. So I don't need to know I don't need to do pen testing to figure out if these systems are vulnerable or not. So my advice even to the clients is typically that do not a PT, but do an assessment. It's not the kind of VA in the VAPT, but OT security assessment based on the OT standards. And these standards, they define, especially for example, the 62443, they define very well on how the assessment should be done. So my recommendation is typically do assessment. The other part is in OT environment, PT tools, you cannot just blindly use them. These controllers that I'm talking about, they are 20, 30 years old. If you just run an IP scan on this, if you run some Nmap commands on the network, they're going to crash. And if a controller crashes and it results in shutdown of the facility, you're going to be kicked out of the facility. So I strongly discourage the IT type pen testing on OT environment.
Rashid, you are next.
Hi. First of all, amazing session, very useful, very informative. People like us who are purely towards the business information security side, this is a new domain and it's a very eye-opener. And we're fortunate that IT security side is, much mature and eventually I think OT security will also follow. You talk about all these standards and control. I was just thinking about one point that, when you mention risk, so are there any specific requirements, any GRC tools or anything that talks about doing a proper risk assessment or any methodology of risk assessment that is different than the one that we use in information security side? Like, for example, in information security side, we have a lot of techniques and tools and methodologies to perform a risk assessment across the organization. So how does it work in the OT security side?
So you see over here, I've mentioned ISO 27000 and 62443 together, because when you talk about the governance and risk, the GRC part of it, this is where you can leverage the most from IT security. So the risk assessment process, we should definitely leverage from IT, from 27000, even though the IC 62443 has its own risk assessment standard. I think it's -3-3. If you want, you can definitely utilize the IT risk assessment framework if your organization already has, but do also check what 62443 says about OT risk assessment and tweak it to OT.
Waqar, you are next. And on WhatsApp, there are some questions in the chat also. After Waqar, you can answer those questions from the chat.
Sure. Gee, I think Waqar is mute.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum to all. Considering the audience feedback seems to be a great session, and I joined a little bit late. So my question is to Mr. Mubarik. We have a lot of pressure at times from the management to cover the OT part since we are a cybersecurity team. So would you recommend any quick fixes, or what are the basic steps to start with? For example, we have been asked to assess the dam security, dams, water reservoirs, the dams. So we don't know from where to start, what to do, since we feel like we need to consolidate cybersecurity first, and we should go into OT. But when these things come, we don't know from where to start. What are the basic tips or the core thing that we should work on, we should start with, that can cover a fair amount of the risk, or we can do a basic kind of assessment?
So I think you use the keyword that I was typing on the screen. You have to start with assessment. And the assessment on the OT side is, excuse me, the process is quite different. No matter which standard you pick up, whether it's ISA or the NIST or the API or even the NCA and all these things, they'll all talk about do the assessment first. And the assessment means the very first step is understanding what you have. In the IT environment, building your asset inventory is a piece of cake, not a piece of cake, but it's very easy. You can run, if you have solar winds or some kind of network management, you run scan, it'll tell you what equipment you have and what software you have and all that, WMI and SNMP and all. In the OT environment, you cannot do that. So it requires a lot of manual assessment. The very first step is do the assessment about what you have, what assets you have, and second is how they're interconnected together. If I go back to one of the architecture drawings that I made over here, if you can see that, the interconnection, in most cases, these are layered networks. Even now over here, you can see maybe if this is the main network, and this is not the IT network, by the way, but this is the OT main network. Then you have some MPLS, then you have another network, then you have another network. They're layered, hidden networks. You cannot, even if somebody allowed you to run a tool, you cannot scan all those networks. You will not even know where they are. So, and these plants that have been there for like 20 years, nobody even knows what components are there. So it is a little bit of a time intensive and resource intensive effort to do this manual assessment. But until you do the assessment and build, number one, there are two things that need to be built. Your asset inventory, what do you have? With some level of details about what IP addresses and what type of network communication and all that. And second is network architecture drawing. Third is data flow drawings. These three, once you develop, then you can talk about, okay, you know, where are the vulnerabilities and where do we need to tweak the architecture? Do we need to create a DMZ, or do we need to, you know, isolate this particular, I guess, part of the plant and all? So assessment is the first step. In fact, if I think I have this, the standard is also open in front of me right now, the 62443. And they actually have a sort of a, let me get to that particular slide and I'll show you. They define a step-by-step process on how you should go about. I'll stop when the screen comes up here. Just bear with me. And by the way, these standards are a pain. So they say this is what you should do. If you can see the screen, yeah. So they say you initiate the so-called cybersecurity management system. They also borrowed from ISMS, Information Security Management System. You do a high-level assessment, risk assessment, do a detailed assessment, select the countermeasures, and then define the policies and procedures, and then implement them. So, and then further down on this standard, they talk about details of how you do this, how you do this. But to me, start with the assessment. Please, please do not buy any piece of equipment. Just 2 days ago, I was talking to a client and they said, oh, we bought a data diode. And I'm like, why? Somebody sold the data diode to them. And I know their architecture, they don't need a data diode. They could have spent that money better in implementing other security controls, which could have given them better security than a data diode. So please do assessment. There were some questions on the chat. Let me try and answer those. From where to start when we have plant equipment which is connected? Like I said, this was the question right here. Yeah, from Yusuf Bhatti. From where to start when we have plant equipment which is connected? Start with the assessment and then do the design and implementation based on the risk. You can never do 100% protection, you know that, in the IT security as well. So, and you always have limited budget. OT security is new. When you go to look for OT security, a budget for OT security, the management says, oh, why? We already have so much, you know, money spent on IT security. So you have limited budget. That means you should focus on that part that gives you the most, I guess, risk protection. Ahmed Salim, similar to a typical IT infrastructure, do we have any hardening and good guidelines for these embedded OS and hardware? No, not really, because these are being developed. Most hardware suppliers have started building these, but the amount of, I guess, the number of equipment that is out there, and some of it is already obsolete. They're not gonna tell you what to do on the obsolete systems. The vendors will tell you what to do on some of the, let's say, you know, still not end of life systems, but there are people like, you know, control systems experts like us who develop these hardening minimum baseline security standards for these embedded systems and hardware.
Hassan, you are next if WhatsApp is done.
Yeah, I'll take one more.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead.
Am I audible, please?
Yes,
thank
yes.
you. First of all, thank you. Thank you for providing us a very detailed and very expert insight into the OT security. I would say my question is twofold. You mentioned that the security concern happens in OT when we go from manual to automation. But within the context of Pakistan, we see even the automation in IT is taking too much time, and not to speak of the OT aspects. So if there is a little migration towards automation within Pakistan, then what aspects would be there for the security of OT? And the second thing is, this is a GSPPP. So I would like to know, speaking of the opportunities, speaking of the potential within OT, you said having an IT security background or IT exposure would definitely help bridge the gap to and to excel within the OT security. But do we have some opportunities within Pakistan related to OT security, or is everything related to OT cybersecurity is abroad and not in Pakistan? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. So let me answer the first one about automation, and that basically is why you need, if I go back to this slide here, that you need a lot of knowledge about industrial automation system. When we use even the terminology, the term automation in IT and OT is very different. And when we talk about automation in IT, it is probably automating a process, let's say in a system that is implemented manually. When we say automation in the ICS environment, it is when you have industrial control system, you already have automation. The industrial control system is the automation system. Automation system is just another name for industrial control system. And in Pakistan, there is today, most facilities, most industrial facilities, if not all, they have industrial control system. They are automated in one way or the other. And I was giving the example in the beginning that back in my early days, let's say you talked about Pakistan, a sugar mill in Pakistan would never implement control system because of the mentality of the owners and all that their plant is running, why should they think about it? But now even a sugar mill is implementing DCS. So there is a humongous amount of industrial control systems installed in Pakistan, especially in private sector, all the FMCGs, the big companies that are out there. And you cannot operate a facility. Think about a fertilizer plant, a refinery, which are quite a few in Pakistan, even electric grid. You think somebody is running out there to close the breaker and open the breaker when this load shedding happens, which happens every 2 hours, every 1 hour. It's all automatic. So there's huge opportunity even in Pakistan. And that brings me to your second part of your question, that yes, in Pakistan, there are companies which are doing OT security. Even our company, ACET Solutions, we have an office in Pakistan, and we are providing OT security services in Pakistan and internationally as well. To me, if you get into this domain, there's huge potential, I would say, for you to grow, whether it's Pakistan or overseas.
Guys, there are a lot of people asking questions. It should be very difficult if we continue. Maybe we'll go for one more hour. I'll give a chance to Avas, because Avas is asking, and Imran and Batisa. They'll be the last people. And Sonia, if you have any questions, you can put in the chat, please. And WhatsApp, can you share any contact details so people can contact you if they have something more to ask?
Sure.
Avas, please go ahead.
I cannot hear you, Avas. Avas, we cannot hear you.
Thank you so much for such an amazing and knowledgeable session. I got my answer in your previous question. Thank you so much.
Sure. Who was next, Shahzad?
Hassan. No, sorry, Imran.
Thank you very much. So I have two questions. It's a very informative session. It's really an eye-opener. Me, from a cybersecurity background, I was actually more into threat intelligence and how the OT cybersecurity space is using that vertical of the business. And you haven't described the threat models that encompasses the OT space as well. So is there any standards, or is there any guidelines? Usually the technologies that are used in enterprise as well, or in any other technology domain, they have specific threat models described. So if there is anything out there, please do share that. And regarding the threat intelligence part, I would like to hear on that aspect as well. Thank you.
Sure. So the OT security domain is still in its infancy, which means it's still an infant. It's still developing. most control systems today are at primitive stage of security. And I'll go back to the point about, forget about threat intelligence. We are talking about basic protection, antivirus. So there are threat intelligence. Okay, and the second part of the answer, I guess, there are many many companies, many vendors who have started making either OT specific products, or they have started tailoring their products to OT environment. For example, we know, I'll give a few examples, not to, I guess, give any reference to any technology, like Fortinet and Palo Alto, and even Cisco. They have their firewalls that are used in the enterprise environment, but they have started making ICS specific features that they built into the firewalls now. So you can buy a Fortinet firewall, which will be suitable for installation. It is next-gen firewall that is aware of the industrial protocols, for example. Even from threat intelligence perspective, these vendors have started providing threat intelligence services that are OT specific, OT, I guess, compatible. And there are other companies who have their own service only, not just part of the product, which are providing threat intelligence. As far as the threat model is concerned, again, we are at a very primitive stage. Some companies are more advanced in their implementation, so they do talk about threat model and all. But in most cases, we don't get to that point, or we're not going to get to that point in the next short while, I guess. That's my opinion.
Batisab, you are next. And WhatsApp, there are some questions in the chat after that, and then we will finish, inshallah.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Ji.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Mubarak bhai, it's wonderful. Very nice. I have a few questions in the chat, so I'll go with them quickly. The first thing I ask, like from where we start, you already answer, like we will go with the assessment. And like if we don't have OT professional on the site and we want to do the assessment for our business case, like at the end, I will go to the management and I'll ask them, I need the budget. So what we can do in that case to build our business case? This is my first question. Second, like I ask here, there are like if it's a factory or a plant, they have multiple devices or machines which are from different vendors. So if we have that type of environment where probably we have Yokogawa, Honeywell, and all those different vendors which are there with their controllers, how we will do the assessment for that type of environment? And the third thing I want to ask, is there a list which have ISO, ISA, and NIST, or even for Saudi Arabia, NCA? There are common things between these for OT standard. And last but not the least, the guy was asking for Pakistan. I think so 4 months back or 6 months back, there was OT attack on K Electric. If they remember, Karachi, it was a famous one. Even they hacked the other data, but there was an attack. They compromised the Karachi electricity. That's it.
Yes. So I'll try, and my memory is very bad, so I'll try and remember all 4 questions. The first one was about, remind me please, apologies. The first one was about what? But our first question was about, I cannot hear you. Yeah, how to go about building a business case. I hope everybody else was also listening to the question. Building a business case is always a challenge. I said before that when you go to the management to ask for budget, they always have this knee-jerk reaction. Oh, nothing has happened to us up until now, so nothing's going to happen. It's a challenge. You will have to build a business case, and companies, vendors can help you build business case because they want the business. The second part, yes, you have many different technologies installed, Yokogawa, Honeywell, or Triconics, or Schneider, Rockwell, and all. I don't want to do sales and marketing over here, but you should connect with my advice always for the exact same reason is, if you go to Honeywell and ask them to do the assessment, they will do an assessment for their system. If you go to Schneider, they will do it for their system. For Rockwell, they'll do it for their systems. Companies like us, which are independent consultants, and I'm giving open statement. Companies like us, you can go to other independent consultants as well. They have expertise on all of these different systems. I've configured all these. I've configured Yokogawa, Honeywell, Rockwell. I've programmed these systems. So we know what the strengths and weaknesses and the cybersecurity features of these systems are. We know their architecture, we know the data flow, we know the protocols. So my advice is go with a company which is a vendor independent or vendor agnostic, and ask them to do an assessment so that it covers the complete spectrum of your OT environment, not just one system or two systems.
I just want to interrupt you here, sorry. The question is also want to add one more thing. Let's say if we have these different vendors, they have their own, okay, on the manufacturing plant itself or the machine itself, if they have embedded system and proprietary, proprietary hardware, and they have their own protocols, does the vendors do those things also for us? Like probably if I will go with the local vendor, he don't have those expertise, what we will do in those cases? Like I can give you example for a CNC machine. When I want to do this OT assessment, the CNC expert, he asked me, you need to verify vendor, did he ever did the assessment for a CNC machine? So I was like, okay, I will ask, and I never got answer back. So what's the solution in those cases?
Yeah. So once again, there are companies who have that level of broad expertise, and they have the expertise. Yes, we're not going to provide you the firmware upgrade or the patch because that has to come from the equipment manufacturer. But in terms of doing the cybersecurity assessment and all, companies like us, we have enough knowledge and experience on those systems, as well as, more importantly, knowledge and experience of the standards to do the assessment. I'm not going to go there and program the CNC machine. That's not my job, but I can do assessment and tell you where the gaps are. And typically the gaps there will be gaps inside the CNC controller as well. But in a lot of cases, the gaps are on the outside, the architecture, the connectivity, and the security controls and the policies and procedures and compliance. So my advice would be to go with an independent consultant. And yes, you need support from the manufacturer as well.
Okay. The last one, there is a common list for ISO, ISA, NIST, NCA, which we can use as a reference.
I mean, people do develop it internally. Our company we have developed our own cross-references between these standards because we provide services where most of these standards are applicable. Obviously, that is an intellectual property. We have spent our time and effort to develop those. So when we go for assessment, for example, we provide compliance reports for all the applicable standards. I'm not saying all standards in the world. So if I do an assessment, let's say in Saudi Arabia, I would typically do 62443 compliance as well as NCA ECC and the NCA critical control systems standard. If it is for Saudi Aramco, then I would give them compliance for their SAEP 99, which is specific to Saudi Aramco. If it is for Saudi Electricity Company, I would give them compliance to their standard, which is 107 and 105. So you cannot have a universal cross-reference. I personally have been involved in some organizations where we have been developing cross-references, even with ISO 27000. So between 27001 and 2, especially the latest released standard version, we've been developing cross-reference for those as well. But all of those are, even if you provide you all of those, I don't think it's going to be of much use to you because you still need the expertise to do the assessment. I would say
that's a good point to win the budget, but it's okay.
So this is last question. I will just from the chat from Sonia. She is asking, do we need certified professionals to conduct OT assessment? If it is that, then what certs should we go for? What certifications are required? Are any available?
Yeah, very good question. And I'm sorry I missed that. I was planning on addressing that in the presentation, but I forgot. Pardon me for that. The most suitable one is the ISA IEC 62443. They have multiple certifications, 4 levels of certification. One is general, they call it fundamentals. And then there is one for risk assessment, there is one for design and implementation, and there is 4 for maintenance. So 4 different courses, 4 different certifications. If you pass all of them, you are certified as an expert. Or if you clear only 1 or 2, you still have that certificate. You can add that as your credential. There are other, like SANS has a couple of certifications. The most famous one is GICSP, not GISPP, GICSP, and the other one is GRID. These 2 are IT and ICS or OT specific. All of these are quite expensive, I would say, because the ISA one, each one is going to cost you maybe around $2,000, or if you are a member, $1,600 each. And the SANS one, of course, they always charge more money. It's about $8,000. These are the only 2, or these are the only ones that I know of that offer certification specific to industrial control systems.
Just look at the chat. One more question, and then we finish it, inshallah. This is a question
okay,
by...
so GICSP has become 9,000. Last time. There's a lot of questions, so if you can...
Mohsin is saying the artificial solutions like Sentinel-1 work for ICT.
Do the AI solutions like Sentinel-1 work for ICT? AI is, in my opinion, is still even premature for IT environment. And OT environment are at least 20 years behind IT. Think about it, Windows XP, come on. So I won't talk about AI solution, although some of the vulnerability management products that are out there, they use AI in their own product to determine if there's a vulnerability or if there's an intrusion. But other than that, at this point, we're talking about basics in the ICT environment. So I would not comment on Sentinel-1 at this time.
Okay, sir, thanks a lot. We will not take any more questions because, mashallah, we spent like 1.5 hours already. So it was a very good session. Thanks again for your time and efforts. Thanks everybody for showing up. We had, mashallah, up to 64 people attended. And even now we have 39 people. So people didn't lose interest. So alhamdulillah, WhatsApp, just think of anything else if you can do something, on a specific part of this. But overall, it was very good knowledge, even for me, because it's also new for me, the OT part. So inshallah, we'll upload this session to our YouTube channel. And if people come ask for more details, I'll get back to you with maybe a customized session on some specific parts. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
And my number is up there. If you have any more questions, please, it's a WhatsApp number. I spend a lot of time in Saudi and Dubai, but the WhatsApp is for my US number. Please, you can send all those questions that didn't get answered, send it to me on WhatsApp and I'll be happy to answer.
And one more thing I will add to WhatsApp is, mashallah, he has had many people in the last few months, maybe a year. So if you have any exposure and you're looking and you want to work in OT, you can contact him also. So maybe he has opportunities for many people from the group. And because you only learn when you actually work on those things. So definitely not many companies are dealing with OT cybersecurity. So ACET Solutions is one of them. So, and mashallah, I have seen Mr. Mubarik hiring people in UAE, in Pakistan also, in Saudi also. So they are doing good business, I believe, in this good, it's benefit for both actually, for them and for the companies also to secure their infrastructure. Thank you, sir. Thank you again. If you have any last messages, you can say, please. Mr. Mubarak, let me finish.
From my side, that's it. Thanks, Shahzad and GISPP for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge. I'll be happy to have other sessions like this in future. Thank you.
Okay, sir. We close the session now. Thank you, guys. Thanks again.